Django Querysets plus Memcached, best practices. Trying to understand what happens during a Django low-level cache set. Particularly, details about what part of the query set gets stored in Memcached. First, am I interpreting the Django docs correctly? A query set, Python object, has / maintains its own cache. Access to the database is lazy, even if the queryset.count is 1000. If I do an object.get for one record, then the dbase will only be accessed once, for that one record. When accessing a Django view via Apache prefork npm, every time that a particular daemon instance X ends up invoking a particular view that includes something like tournamers_set equals tournament result.objects.all. This will then result, each time, in a new tournamers_set object being created. That is, anything that may have been cached internally by a tournamers_set Python object from a previous TCP/IP visit is not used at all by a new request's tournamers_set. Now the questions about saving things to Memcached within the view. Let's say I add something like this at the top of the view. What gets stored during the cache.set? Does the whole query set, Python object, get serialized and saved? Since the query set hasn't been used yet to get any records, is this just a waste of time, since no particular record's contents are actually being saved in Memcached? Any future requests will get the query set object from Memcached, which will always start fresh, with an empty local query set cache. Access to the dbase will always occur. If the above is true, then should I just always resave the query set at the end of the view, after it's been used throughout the view to access some records, which will result in the query set's local cache to get updated, and which should always get resaved to Memcached? But then, this would always result in once again serializing the query set object. So much for speeding things up. Or, does the cache.set force the query set object to iterate and access from the dbase all the records, which will also get saved in Memcached? Everything would get saved, even if the view only accesses a subset of the query set? I see pitfalls in all directions, which makes me think that I'm misunderstanding a whole bunch of things. Hope this makes sense and appreciate clarifications or pointers to some standard guidelines. Thanks.
Querysets are lazy, which means they don't call the database until they are evaluated. One way they could get evaluated would be to serialize them, which is what cache.set does behind the scenes. So no, this isn't a waste of time. The entire contents of your tournament model will be cached, if that's what you want. It probably isn't, and if you filter the query set further, Django will just go back to the database, which would make the whole thing a bit pointless. You should just cache the model instances you actually need. Note that the third point in your initial set isn't quite right, in that this has nothing to do with Apache or preforking. It's simply that a view is a function like any other, and anything defined in a local variable inside a function goes out of scope when that function returns. So a query set defined and evaluated inside a view goes out of scope when the view returns the response, and a new one will be created the next time the view is called, i.e. on the next request. This is the case whichever way you are serving Django. However, and this is important, if you do something like set your query set to a global, module level variable, it will persist between requests. Most of the ways that Django is served, and this definitely includes mod_whiskey, keep a process alive for many requests before recycling it, so the value of the query set will be the same for all of those requests. This can be useful as a sort of bargain basement cache, but is difficult to get right because you have no idea how long the process will last, plus other processes are likely to be running in parallel which have their own versions of that global variable. Updated to answer questions in the comment. Your questions show that you still haven't quite grasped how query sets work. It's all about when they are evaluated, if you list, or iterate, or slice a query set that evaluates it, and it's at that point the database call is made. I count serialization under iterating here, and the result stored in the query set's internal cache. So, if you've already done one of those things to your query set, and then set it to the external cache, that won't cause another database hit. But every filter operation on a query set, even one that's already evaluated, is another database hit. That's because it's a modification of the underlying SQL query, so Django goes back to the database and returns a new query set with its own internal cache.
If you want to support the channel, please consider liking and subscribing.